Hello, and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight, we have former Illuminati member Shane Sedore. But before I introduce him, Raised by Giants is on Rokfin. Go over there, set up a Rokfin account. I release one premium video a week over there, and it is less than a YouTube premium account. And you'll get all of my premium content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform Rokfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It's the most powerful antioxidant on the planet, helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code Giants10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire order. I highly recommend it. I've been using it for over a year. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, Shane Sedore. Shane is a former Illuminati member and is known online as Shane the Ruiner from his blog. He is a speaker, author, singer, and songwriter with knowledge from experience within mystery schools and secret programs. Using alchemy, he turned his experiences into teaching others how to harness and control their own personal power, as well as to tap into energies of creation. Hello, Shane. Wonderful to have you, brother. How are you doing?
All is well, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited for the conversation. Like we were talking earlier, watched you on Camelot way back in the day, and watched you on Jay Widener's show as well. And it was really interesting. I didn't realize, which I knew that this individual, we don't have to speak his name because we know kind of how he is. But this individual basically stole all of your work, right, from your blog, and then kind of changed it and manipulated it into his own, right?
Not exactly just mine. I mean, as a matter of fact, a lot of the things I was saying were contrary to what he was saying. There was a researcher between us that was kind of doing that. He was, yeah, I guess that's how Jay got involved because it was through Gaia TV, the Cosmic Disclosure Show. I was pitched that front role first, and it ended up being with that other gentleman when I refused it. And yeah, his story was just basically collected from, the researcher involved, getting information from people like me, as well as, what's out there online in the forums and different Facebook groups, all of that type of stuff, books, and just kind of put it together like, pretty much anyone could do, right? Like it wouldn't take a degree in anything to reconstruct that concept, to do a bunch of research and twist that into your own story and then present it as if it's real. There's major divergence in the things that I've presented from that common narrative, because I didn't have to do that. But yeah, that's kind of how it all. That's how I ended up getting found by the alternative community, was because I wrote a blog that was called Avians, and blue avians were a buzzword at the time. And in the Google search results, they got mixed up. People assumed we were kind of talking the same thing, and over time realized that wasn't quite the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the regurgitation and the combination of a lot of different people's stories, and how you can just listen to a bunch of different people and then collect and then make your own kind of scenario out of that, and then go out there in the community and pass it off as your own story. That's a really big problem that I've really found, especially with people that are kind of coming up right now. It just seems like a conglomeration of a bunch of different people talking, and they've put their own kind of spin on it. And you can always kind of tell, when they've copied people because of the tone of their voice. It's just something with me. Like I can just hear that it's like almost like on a script, right? And they're just, and whenever you try and deviate from the script at all, that it kind of catches them off guard and they don't really know what to do.
Yeah, you can notice it when anyone's answering questions, whether or not they're like pre-canned questions, right? Like if someone, like as an example, if you had given me a list of questions before today to read through, then I could have a bunch of pre-canned questions, right? But we didn't do that, obviously. I don't do that. And so every time someone answers a question, there should be, the facts should obviously remain the same if they're telling the truth, but there should be variance in the way that they deliver it unless they've memorized a script and they're repeating it, right? And we can see that with many other forms of speaking, public speaking, like a lot of people do that. Like how many variants of Tony Robbins are there in the world? There's many, right? And they've basically just taken what he's done and added their own flavor to it, which is, of course, okay if you're doing what Tony Robbins does. But if you're in this community and you're talking to a bunch of damaged people and convincing them to believe you, and also meanwhile convincing them of a reality that's not real and you didn't have a part of based on these lies that you're telling them, that is much different and in my opinion very wrong, because the bottom line is there are probably millions of people out in the public right now who have gone through these programs unknowingly and have a bunch of mixed ideas and memories about it all in their head. And then they come to this community and they get presented that, and it's like the dog chasing its tail. There's no solution there because they've fantasticized the stories so much that they're no longer true, right? And other people hear that, it kind of fits with what they remember, and so they basically just adopt this other level of it, right? And or this other layer from that speaker, use the same words, add the same terminology, all the same concepts and idea, and then you have a regurgitation of the same story almost unintentionally. And so that's kind of the harm in it. And then you also have a lot of people out there who are believing they're, super soldiers and all of these things that quite clearly does not match up with the reality. Like I haven't seen, maybe a couple of men that have claimed to be super soldiers I maybe wouldn't want to fight, but the rest of them I would have no problem fighting as an example, right? Whereas if I actually believe that they were a super soldier, I'd probably be scared to death, just as an example. And then with the secret space program, yeah, that's a whole can of worms there, right? And the
So
program,
convoluted, bro. There's so many different. If you were a new person, you never heard about the secret space program, and you got into one of these chats or someone doing it, you would be completely lost. You'd have absolutely no idea what's going on because there's so many things that people talk about, and they don't give any kind of context to what's going on, like ever, and it just becomes like what you're saying, a cat, chasing his tail, or a dog chasing its tail, and then it just becomes like this whole fantastical story that makes absolutely no sense, right? Like, and you have my original theory with it was is that because we know that some of the programs are legit, like the MK Ultra programs. There's proof of the MK Ultra programs actually being a thing. Stargate programs, remote viewing with the CIA. A lot of those documents have been declassified. So we know that they were interested in doing these kinds of things, and there's proof for that. But my original thought, whenever I was trying to decipher all this in my mind, was that it had something to do with the Montauk Project, right? And like how they would strap people down into a chair. They would apparently open up a portal in front of them, and then which now that I'm thinking about it, it seems more like a simulation, like what you're talking about. It's a holographic simulation that they're opening up in front of them. But my original thought was that, well, if they can mind fracture people with the MK Ultra, disassociate them to such a degree, and then if they actually could open up a real portal, then they would be able to take a part of that fractalized consciousness and throw it through the portal, and then have that part of the consciousness go out and live a 20 and back program, 40 and back, 60 and back, and then come back. And it would be like 5 minutes in this reality, but it was like 40, 60 years out there in a completely different alternate reality or parallel reality.
I mean, everyone's had dreams. Everyone understands the time warp between dreams and reality, right? Like you can have a dream that seems like it goes on for days or weeks, right? There's even been people who have done things like smoke DMT and have an experience like that where they're gone, or salvia or something like that. Like a very famous comedian talks about one where he was gone and had like a whole other life that he just lived for 3 to 6 months. Meanwhile, he was just sitting in the same chair for 10 minutes, right? And he can't really distinguish. He knows that he wasn't really living this other life, but he can't really distinguish the memories from reality. That's no different, right? Like DMT and these different suggestion type drugs, like LSD, like salvia, like magic mushrooms, all of those things put you in a hypnotic, trance-like, suggestible state. You give someone the right concoction, put something on a screen in front of them, especially if you can holographically project images into the brain, which we can do, then you can convince people that they are actually living through these experiences. And you can actually design it like a movie that they interact with, almost like a video game that they go out and play. I sometimes use movies to show people how this works, like Ender's Game, right? If you remember an Ender's Game, I mean, that was set in a world where they actually were out in space and having fights with aliens, but the majority of what he went through was actually a simulation he thought was real. And then the movie actually wraps up by them putting him through a simulation he thinks is just a simulation, but ends up being real, right? So that's kind of showing you both ends of that concept. But when I say proof is in the result, every whistleblower has said that disclosure is coming. Even they have kind of told you that they were going to tell you the truth eventually, right? The truth is out there. And when I wrote my blog, I called it The Path of Discoveries, which is them slowly releasing technology to the public that they just discovered, right? New scientific evidence that they just discovered, new facts about us as humans in the past that they just discovered. And we have that. We have a ton of that. And what we don't have is any technology that matches the secret space program. What we do have is a bunch of technology that matches the secret space program as I present it. And like, it was called that, it was called the secret space program, but then it didn't have anything to do with outer space. They actually have a different word for the concept of what outer space is because they actually understand what it is. Space, or outer space, is something the public has been programmed to believe in. It's not even real in the way that they teach it to us. So of course, it's just a play on language, which is a typical magician trick of illusion, right? Just to like play with the language. Secret space program. You hear that. You even have that in your memory because you've heard it repeated in your ears a bunch of times. And then you're out in the public, and of course, that becomes outer space. And again, to relate it to a movie, if you've ever seen the movie Get Out, they show you what the secret space program is.
It's in your mind.
And they show it to you in context of how they can use it to program you and basically push you back while something else takes control and drives you like a car, right? So once again, we have all of these real things in the world that if you put them together, lead to one example of a secret space program. What we do not have is anything that even resembles the crazy amount of technology involved in the secret space program as it's provided. I mean, we have UFOs and UAPs and these things that they're disclosing now, but they're also openly admitting that they don't really know what they are, which may be a lie, but they're unmanned, right? So basically what has happened is we've taken the technology and we've developed it to a point where we can move things at hypersonic speeds, and we can create transmedium craft. What I mean, like something that could go from water to air flawlessly, but we can't put people in them yet. And there is no outer space to shoot them into. And so what we do see is them shooting rockets into the ocean over and over again, and showing us holograms of a car floating around in space and all of these other things that are clearly fake, right? And yeah, like I said, proof is in the result here, right? I know it's all fantastical. Like my side of the story, very hard to believe, right? And the only thing, and I've been saying this since I came forward, I can't prove it, but time will prove it. Right. And when I say proof is in the result, that's how it proves. The things that I said back then have happened, right? Like when I laid out what the plan was, that started in 2020, and it's clear as day for all of us to see. We can see exactly how it worked. There are sentences written into that blog post that echo what Klaus Schwab is saying today, word for word. you will want this. We will give you what you want and you will be happy. You will own nothing and be happy. This is all stuff I wrote about almost 10 years ago now that we're now seeing actually happen. And so that's the only way someone like me could ever prove themselves, right? I don't have anything physical I could show you, like, hey, here's a picture of me in this underground base. Obviously, I don't have that, right? But I can, through my predictions, I guess, or my projections into the future based on what I do know, provide proof and results. And so far, I'm batting 1,000 on that. I haven't been wrong about much. Even my more projected into the future theory of where we end up and what we're actually doing now is divergent from what I was taught, and also seems to be collecting more and more evidence of being correct as time goes on. So
So
yeah,
yeah, let's talk about how you knew that kind of information and was able accurately able to predict what what was going to be happening. Was that something that you were told through these programs and being a part of this Illuminati bloodline and being into these mystery schools? Is those things that you were talking about something that was frequently brought up within those programs?
yes. I had a kind of unique view because I was being trained to basically be part of what the World Economic Forum is now. Like I was being groomed to be a public, almost spokesperson for all of this stuff at one point in time. So I had to know how all of these pieces were going to fit together. I had to know things like how they ran disinformation on the public in order to, pull off things like QAnon or pull off things like the secret space program, as we've been talking about. And so I've had that like almost like a bird eyes view of what they've been doing for a long time. And so from that, once I was out, I was just able to, like, I knew what their plan was. And I just told you. They know that I've told you and they're not worried because, once again, they knew what was going on, especially at that time, right? Like, it's written into the blog, but like, I actually had a meeting with one of them where they started laughing about that secret space program that we were talking about at the very beginning of this talk, as opposed to what I was speaking about. And he said to me straight up, he's like, they're not going to listen to you. I'm like, of course they're not. This is the sexier story, and my story doesn't sound so sexy, and that one does. So of course, right? And that's exactly what happens. So um, yeah, it was just everything that I saw and understood from what they taught me, as well as, kind of just what I know as me and as a soul, and having memory beyond even this life. It was just easy for me to put those pieces together. But like, as an example of the things that I would be exposed to when I was younger, some of them I barely even understood. Like, I used to go to this one lodge all the time. It was a Freemason lodge, not that it was a Freemason meeting, but it was held at a Freemason lodge. And there was always a full scale model of New York City with planes in the World Trade Center. And I never knew what it was. This is when I was a kid, like 13, 14, 15. So that would have been like 93, 94, 95. And then in 2001, that happened, right? And so as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, that's what that model was about, right? I knew they were going to do something. I didn't know what, but that's the way that they work too, is they have a bunch of these little plans that they can kind of pull off when they need to in order to start a ball rolling in a certain direction to get us to a certain outcome.
Do you think that that's something to do with there's a lot of occult themes that are involved in these kinds of programs too? Am I correct on that? Like, there's um maybe not so much ritual sacrifice, but some kind of magic going on, right? Because that almost sounds like a sort of a manifestation type of thing, to just have the towers with a model and planes around it back 10 years before it actually happened. It's kind of like, we're going to put this here because this is what we're going to do, and we're going to see it every day and we're going to get away with it, right? Because I think that that's kind of how manifestation works on a subconscious level, right? It's kind of how like affirmations work, right? If you put something on your refrigerator and you read something every day, it tends to become a part of your reality. So if you have a model of two towers and planes around it, then they're prepping it to be a part of the reality that they're trying to create.
Yeah, it's a combination of magic, which they are very well aware of and have deliberately hidden, and like I said, like muddied the water for us to try and learn. That was one of the things that I had to do, was learn all of their different systems of magic, so that I kind of understood why they had all of these different systems of magic. It's the same thing as all the different types of religion. First of all, it's that different people learn in different ways, but they all have what I call gatekeepers, which is kind of like a limitation to them, or like, certain things that you have to do. So it's twofold. It's one, setting a long-term plan, right? Like I said, if that was already in the works in 1993 and they didn't even do it until 2001, then they've had a lot of time to actually plan out the logistics of it. And then, of course, the more metaphysical element of that, of like kind of programming that into their own consciousness. They did do obviously a lot of rituals involved. It as an action is a ritual, right? So yeah, definitely magic involved. A lot of what the programs actually were was to test and quantify our magical abilities, our psychic abilities, our telekinetic abilities, our telepathic abilities, all that kind of stuff, all the paranormal type, metaphysical type stuff, so that they could duplicate it all with technology. And that is the occult part of it, of the hiding it from us, right? It's like giving us a facsimile of it that's so similar that we recognize it, and we kind of think that it's real. We think that it's right. Sorry, like we think that that's right, because our intuition remembers the organic version of that, the magic version of that, right? So like supercomputer and quantum computing is something that we are capable of as individuals, as beings, as souls incarnated into bodies. As our brain can work like a quantum computer does. And so they learned how our brain works so well, and then they developed quantum computers based on the way our brain works. They learned how telepathy works, and they learned how to duplicate that with technology. And a lot of what the simulations were for, the programs were to test those things and sort them out so that they could quantify it all and develop it into something physical that they can then control. Because if we all had manifestational abilities, if we all knew magic and we were all taught magic, they wouldn't be able to control that, right? But if they give us technology that is indistinguishable from magic, which is that heavily programming phrase we're probably all familiar with, also tied into the secret space program, then we accept it, right? And they have the on and off switch for it all. They can determine the price point on it, whether or not your social credit score determines you can even have it, right? So yeah, it's just making sure that they keep all of that under their control. And they're doing that because we're going through an evolution, and they know that we are. And they know that if they were to just leave us alone, they would lose their control, they would lose their power. So it's almost like nature's trying to take us in one way, so they've made this like mirrored version of that to entice us to go their way instead of the way nature wants us to go. And unfortunately, because of the mind control and the MK Ultra that's been done to the public, we're falling for it. At least we're not, but like the masses are falling for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up that they wanted to, the whole goal of the programs was to duplicate it for technology. That's really interesting. I kind of thought maybe it was more that they were trying to duplicate it on a individual basis, right? Like into another organic human, through the torture, the mind control, and the mind fracturing, the Project Stargate stuff with because there was this huge boom of psychic remote viewers during the Cold War, right? Like Pat Price, Uri Geller, Ego Swan, and it said that Sidney Gottlieb, which was the head of the MK Ultra program, was wanting to use psychedelics on the remote viewing CIA projects, right? And I think that was not only to figure out mind control, but create these psychics and remote viewers in the MK Ultra sub project called Project Spellbinder, right? Where Sydney was actually trying to create these remote assassins and these remote viewers.
And that's the progression, right? Is like to learn the magic, learn how to through magic control, and then understanding that at that point, we're eventually going to discover it and end up on equal playing field with them. And because they don't want that, then they present us the technology instead, right? So obviously these programs have happened over a long period of time, right? Like it's been longer than most people would probably even accept these have been going on. But it's been the progression of them to first, obviously, if you're going to learn all the dynamics of how we work, then you're going to want to experiment with us in all those different ways, right? So remote viewing as an example, you've got the publicly disclosed version of that, but then you've also got the program version of that, right? And so the program version has a lot of success stories and is very tightly honed. And then they let a little bit of that happen in like the CIA and the FBI and other organizations like that that they know eventually will be public, that don't have such fruitful results. And so we end up with things like Men Who Stare at Goats, right? Which is the same, basically the same concept or the same method of what they've done with the secret space program, where they kind of make things look like bullshit, right? It's like presenting us magic through fiction only, right? Now the majority of people think that magic is fiction. And yeah, that is mind control, right? So all of these programs are all kind of happening in isolation, testing various aspects of us, both on a psychic level, on a metaphysical level, and on just like a nuts and bolts brain computer level, like the MK Ultra program. One of the main reasons for doing, or one of the main benefits, I guess, that they took from MK Ultra was the ability to create alters, right? Like obviously the way the public even perceives it is about the Manchurian Candidate type alter. But the reason for alters was so that they could take these kids, do these things to them, and send them home and not have to worry about them talking to their parents or their schools or anything like that about them, right? So what we have available to us in the public in terms of what they succeeded with MK Ultra is like the lowest level of what they've succeeded with. And they can give us that because they are far advanced beyond that, right? So yeah, it's like, I don't know, if you and I were going to compete in something, I wouldn't want to tell you my whole abilities, right? I would want you to believe that my abilities were here when really they were here. It's bluffing, right?
Right. So you got an advantage. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, the way that I discovered, because I've read through all of the disclosed MK Ultra documents that's been declassified, and it's kind of like what you're talking about. It's they only give the unsuccessful projects. They only disclose the unsuccessful kinds of projects and make it look like Looney Tunes, so that they can kind of cover it up and say that they're not doing it anymore when they started carrying it out. But from my understanding, it started out with the CIA doing the experimentation on their own men, right, to kind of discover if they could get rid of agents' memories that were going to quit the department. Now, this is just the official, story that that they still had some kind of classified information. So if they could wipe their memories, then they could kind of go free. So they would utilize different kinds of drugs, pain, torture, hypnosis, electric shock to try and get them to forget. And then they would also use this mixture of chemicals, like you were talking about earlier, which was called, I believe it's called BZ. Right. And BZ, you can Google BZ and you'll see that the military was literally using this drug on their soldiers as experimentation. And I think it was 1959, and it was like a volunteer program, right? And they were told that they were going to be experimenting on new weapons. And whenever they would get to Fort Detrick, Maryland, where the experimentation was done, they found out that it was being done on drugs and chemicals, right? And they weren't told any of that. They just knew that they would lose their mind for some days or some weeks after. They would just completely go, out of their head and experience something similar to Agent, I believe it was Agent Orange, right? Does it make you just go out of your head to where you have no idea who you are, what you're doing, or I mean, people can Google that. It's a real thing. But I think the real goal there, this is my personal opinion, was to just to expand it, right, to just a collective level. If you can figure it out on an individual level, then you can expand it worldwide, and then you have like a bunch of, and we see that with the drugs, that the prescription drugs that people are on now. It's just an offshoot of what they were doing with the chemical concoctions in the 50s, and then they expanded it to give it to everybody on the planet. I mean, it's there's studies that I believe it's 85 to 90% of people in the United States are on some kind of prescription medication.
Yeah, and now they're doing things also like admitting that, depression isn't a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that we are treating the brain chemically is actually not effective. And yeah, it's been working through placebo effect for many, many people, but for the majority, it hasn't, because it's not a sound science. But it was very commonly accepted science for a very, very long time. Like, I have a degree in it. I have had to go through that, and
Mm.
all the while knowing this is a lie. This is not how it works, right? But yeah, that's the MK Ultra program, more or less. What we know about it disclosed to the public is the most surface layer of it. It gets a lot deeper than that, and that sounds crazy enough, right? That's effective enough, and that's been employed on the general public, right? Like, it did go through all those experimentations. Like, even by the time it got to the CIA, that was like a step into the public, step out of the underground programs into the public sector. And then once they realized they could kind of do it to anybody, and that it was actually pretty effective and easy to do, and they had a bunch of different methods to do it through, then they just expanded that program and released it on the public in the ways that you're talking about. It's like a combination of, pollutants in our environment, the various things they get us to consume, whether that's soy or whether that's, the drugs, the pharmaceuticals you were talking about, other stuff in lollipops that they give us and whatnot. Also pushing, drugs on the public, because there's a negative side effect to all of those things, right? Like, I people should be allowed to smoke weed, but there's a negative effect to smoking weed. People should be allowed to do mushrooms, but there's a negative effect to that. And unfortunately, this is all being pushed in the public with no real acknowledgement of the negative effect. And that's so that the negative effect can be taken advantage of, right? And now with all this technology, and especially with social media and the way that we communicate with each other, because we are so incorrectly programmed, it basically just, we do the work for them at this point in time. And over the last 2 years, we've really seen that, with everyone turning in their neighbors and turning on each other, and all the different infightings, and everything that the left does to break the world, and all the various things we can point to over the last 2 years are just all of those plans hitting their peak, like actually having their result in the world. And yeah, it's, from my perspective, because this has been something that, I was being trained to be a part of. I think when I got out, there was like almost a part of me that thought it was just not going to happen. Right. But having watched it actually all roll out, even without still being involved in it, there's a part of me that's almost impressed, because it is pretty fucking impressive. They've done an amazing job of pulling this off. And yeah, all the stuff that most people point to as like them screwing up is also part of the plan, right? It's kind of feeding into the conversation we had before we came on the air here.
Mm.
They have been trying to get rid of the word conspiracy theory. One avenue to do that was the QAnon route, where they've now criminalized it, right? Like, they've turned conspiracy theory into domestic terrorist on one hand. On the other hand, what they're now doing is creating incompetence theory, where they're going to try to convince us that all of these things are not happening as a part of some divine plan to control the world, that it's all happening because of the incompetence of the people in power, right? And that's what it's turning into. There was actually on Lex Friedman podcast, he just had a CIA whistleblower more or less on, who more or less said that like, these things aren't conspiracy, they're incompetence. This is because the system's falling apart and they don't have control over it, all of that stuff. They want us to believe that, because that's their scapegoat, right? As they're doing all of this stuff and it's pulling off, like the effect is still there, whether it looks sloppy in the process or not, the ends still works in their favor. All of that sloppiness, as you had termed it earlier, is kind of what's making us not notice it as it's happening, right? We've all been programmed to look for the event, right? Whether that's the rapture on one end or the ascension on another, or just the event, right? Some big thing, global thing that's going to happen, mass alien invasion, some big catastrophe, something like that.
We
And then
already had it, Shane. We already had the big event, and people
that's
just looked over it.
and it wasn't one event, it was a series of things all playing out at once, right? Like, and that's my point, and you nailed it, is that people looked over it because of that method, and they know how we work, and they know that if they were to give us one big event, yeah, that would not work, right? Like, and that's why, like, from day one I've said there will be no false flag alien invasion. They know that won't work, and they love us talking about it because they know it won't work, and it makes us sound absurd, just like QAnon, but or many other things we've been talking about. But if they take all these little steps almost in isolation, like on this side of the world they're doing that, on this side of the world they're doing that, even the way they handled what I call the joy, which was that thing that went around for the last 2 years, trying to avoid any censorship on your end,
Yep. Thank you.
even the way that they handled that, you can see how every country did something a little bit different, but it was all kind of in the same basket. That's how trial and error works, and that's how different programs work, because you try a little bit here, you try a little bit there, you try a little bit there. Okay, this worked, that didn't, and then you regroup it all. And that's where we're stepping into now, is like they saw what worked and what didn't, and so whatever they're going to go with next is going to be based on this last 2 years of experimenting with us.
Yeah, I see a lot of the different countries as testing grounds, right? And they'll do something for an experiment, and then it's exactly like what you said. They'll come back and regroup, and then they'll try and do it better the next time, and it'll be something slightly different, but very similar in nature. Right?
Even with like countries, like as an example, this whole conspiracy movement seems to be centered around the United States. It's almost like we think it's all happening in the US. It's actually not. As a matter of fact, my country has way more of it than the United States does, but nobody pays any fucking attention to Canada, so it's a great place to hide it all. But the proof being in the result, we're also the country that is clearly playing out this agenda the fastest, right? And the most efficiently, because Canadians are too nice to question authority at all, and they've basically used that same type of MK Ultra structure on an entire country, right? And like kind of a little bit of proof behind that, Freemasons openly pride themselves on the fact that they've been in Canada for 300 years. Canada is only 150 years old. Right? So they've literally been designing this country longer than it's been a country. Right? And so, yeah, this is the home of everything. That's why you find all the buildings here. That's why all the elites are buying stuff up here and coming up here, is because that country that they've been putting all the attention into is kind of like a bait and switch, right? Like everyone's focused over here. Everyone watch America. Everyone watch America. While that's happening, look at what Canada's actually doing, right? And Australia as well, or the UK as well. But because they've got everyone focused on the United States, it's all being overlooked. If any of this stuff was happening in the United States, it would be, all of us would be talking about it. But because it's not, we are not. So there you go.
That's why they couldn't do the boots on the ground type of scenario in the United States, right? That's why it had to all be psychological, make us think that it's our idea to do it, our idea to put a face diaper on, our idea to stay indoors and quarantine, right? That was the whole plan. And it's interesting that you say, everything's on the United States, because I really do feel like people in the United States are living in some sort of echo chamber, right? And they can't see outside of the box. They can't see into, different countries. And I want to know if like the ET phenomenon is such a and UFOs are such a big deal in other countries or not, or is it just in the United States, right? Are we the
Most
only country
it's
talking about UFOs?
well, that's the thing is like China and Russia, they have a totally different education system behind these things too, right? And other like it's really just kind of these westernized or Americanized countries that all follow that same narrative. And that's true for a lot of different things, like even like Sasquatch, right? Like if you lived in China or you lived in Russia, you might learn about Sasquatch in school as an animal that you need to avoid if you go into the woods. If you live in North America, it's a crypto creature that doesn't exist, right? So UFOs, aliens, that entire concept, there's so much lost in translation that and because there's no real reporting over here, you have to look for it, right? And most people are not looking for it. Most people are very narrow-minded in their own little countries, right? So yeah, it's been it's been part of the plan, and they've done a really great job of that, of like having everyone focused on the US at all times so that they can pull off all this other stuff in all these other countries. And we're coming to an end of that because part of their plan has been and seems to still be to recreate the same dynamic that they did many years ago in Rome, where they made the empire fall so that they could start again. And I believe the United States is the same experiment for them.
Now, when you say they, are you talking about the Illuminati? Because we know that the Illuminati isn't their real name, right? They have a different name.
It's not their real name, but the concept is correct. Basically, what they are is an order or a organization, if you will, that has got their tentacles in everything on Earth, right? So, like even like we mentioned secret societies like Freemasons, Rosicrucians, stuff like that. They have members in those. They have members in the police forces. They have members in the legal system. They have members at Pfizer. They have members like everywhere, right? And then all of those people understand the plan and are all part of that bigger umbrella, but the people on those levels with them do not, right? So that's how the hiding of it, the controlling of it actually works. So the strings are up here, and all the main players, all the people on this floor think that they're in control of everything. Like when we're mentioning organizations like the CIA and all of that, like that's steps down the pyramid from the people who are actually making and orchestrating these plans. So that's just the public representation of the same concept of secrecy and data collection and intelligence that they do. So it's yeah, I call it like a Russian doll or a Chinese doll thing. I have like one doll, and then you open that up, and there's the same doll, but just a smaller scale of that inside, right? So
Yeah, rings within rings of power. I think I heard someone
exactly,
say.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so like the organizations that we know and can name, like even banks and the military and the governments, that's all like the third doll, and there's two more dolls that are bigger than them at least, right? So the plan trickles down to them, and they carry it out like it's what they're supposed to do. They don't really know any better. And kind of also tying into what we were talking about before we came on the air, they think that they're doing what is necessary. They think that they're doing what is necessary. They think they're doing the right thing. They legitimately believe it is their job to look after us and be our parents. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they're treating us just like parents treat children. I mean, not good parents, but just like shitty parents treat children. Do as I say, not as I do what I say, or else, that kind of approach to it. And, I'm not going to tell you the truth. I'm just going to tell you what you need to know.
Need to know basis, compartmentalize it, get people thinking that they're in control when they're really not in control, and they're very disposable. You can get rid of them. I mean, we have a very prominent doctor that's stepping down in I think December is the whole thing, because he's disposable. Like all these people are disposable, bro. Like anybody that has like a face that's in the media, that's out in front and in center of it all, like they're disposable, dude. Like they don't matter. They're just the puppet. They're just the front man for the actual real organization. But do people know what this group of entities are really called? Do they actually have a, you don't have to say it, I'm sure you probably know, but do they have like a real name that they actually call themselves?
They do. It is actually a real name. Like it would sound like, like Shane or something like that, that type of name, as opposed to something like Illuminati, which sounds like more like a group, right? So yeah, it sounds more like a family name, their actual name. Um, and yeah, I mean, they're all self-aware of each other, but not everyone playing the game along with them is aware, right? Like that's how they've kept it compartmentalized, is by making, you know, the Hillary Clintons and the Bill Gates and the Elon Musks and all of those people believe that they're in control, but really they've got whispers in their ears from the actual people in control. And I mean, that system has changed over time. It used to be led by an off-world species. It's not anymore. It's now humans who used to be led by an off-world species. And I think that's part of why, that's 100% of why they're going with technology over magic, is because they can control the technology and they're not as strong in magic as those off-world entities who used to control them were. And so they don't have that backup anymore, or those bodyguards, if you will. So they needed to do something that they knew they could control, which is technology. They have all the parts, they have all the money, they have all the stuff that, you know, we build technology out of. So they control it 100%. Whereas magic, they can't really control that other than through the occult manners of hiding it from us, muddying the waters, making it too complicated for us to learn, or so complicated that we get frustrated along the way and never learn it. But yeah, I think I'm bridging conversations there. But yeah, that's the goal. That's the
So this off-world species that you're referring to, you're referring to a reptilian uh, species, correct? Because I'd always heard that they were kind of in charge of creating this simulation that we call reality here, and it was set up in a way that like an experimentation, and that they were kind of in charge of it to see, what would happen if this person came together, what would happen if that person came together, what would happen if this event happened, what are they going to do? Are they going to come together? Are they not going to come together? Are they going to split apart? On an individual basis and a collective basis. So when did they just abandon the experiment here on Earth? Because I kind of talked about this too in one of my presentations that I put together, that they just abandon us, and they're just like gone, and we're just here on our own, and we're trying to do things the best that we can. I think I put that in the Attack on the Heart, A Fight for Humanity, or maybe the third one. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I did them or listened to them, but yeah, I had that same kind of information, but I thought it was the Greys. It wasn't the reptilians, but you're saying that it's the reptilians.
Greys are like tools. It's almost like clones or like cars. Pretty much every off-world species or every species of another planet develops that technology at some point in time. It's like a biological entity that you can remote control like a car through consciousness. So similar to like the idea of clones that like I've talked about and other people talk about here, using human genetic clones, and then moving your consciousness into the clone and driving that clone like a car, like a second body. We can do that as well with that body form that we all know as grays, right? That's why there's a bunch of subtle variations in them, is because we have 4 or 5 different species of ETs, aliens, whatever you want to call them, off-world entities that use what we call grays as a type of technology here, so that they can interact with the planet and don't actually have to come here, right? So that's also a part of why it's been programmed into the narrative for the public of that image, right? Is because eventually we're going to get there too, right? Like that's kind of they're trying to push us in this direction where we stop using these bodies to do things, and we start, using the metaverse will be the first step to it. And then the metaverse will expand into robotics. And then those robotics will basically the same thing as a robot, but a biological version of a robot, which then gives us more feedback on a data level. I'm not a scientist, so I'm explaining this poorly, but you can get more environmental feedback out of a biological robot than you could out of a mechanical one.
Mm.
Right. So
It's kind of
that's
like that movie Surrogates. Have you seen the movie Surrogates?
yes. Yeah, the same idea, right? And
Uh,
that's actually like an earlier version. That's what the cloning program was leaning towards. I think they've kind of decided not to go that way, but they might still. I think that might still be available to the public at some point in time. Is that same concept similar to, I think they did in another show called Altered Carbon, with a slight twist on it, in that they were saving people's consciousness in like a type of disc, and then the disc would go into the what they call them in that sheath or something like that, like a body, and then you could drive that. It's the same concept, and we will get there.
like
First
a
step,
consciousness transfer technology where they can upload the consciousness into any avatar that they've created, an inorganic avatar, robot avatar that they can just take a chip out and then boom, put the consciousness into that avatar, and then you have an animated body. But then like how, because I think that the soul is the foundation of the consciousness, right? So the soul and the consciousness is the same, um it's the same thing,
yeah.
right?
God, when I say like one of the programs I was in was involved with clones, because I can easily get out of body, and there's a process that even you and I could do if we were in the room, where it's called body swapping. We can essentially astral project out of each other's bodies, like our respective bodies, and make the conscious decision that we're going to switch, and then you could be Shane for a while and I could be Ryder for a while, right? It's a difficult process, but if you can master that process, then doing that with a clone is super easy, right? You can actually like go and operate these clone bodies in that way. So that was actually one of the programs that I was in. I was a trainer for, because I just have a very natural ability to do it and understand the dynamics really well to be able to walk people through it. Is what And they were using that in conjunction with the cloning program to train people how to operate clones.
So if we were to switch bodies right now, would I have your memories and all of your thoughts and ideas, or do you take your thoughts with you and your memories with you whenever you go into a different body?
There's memory that is like purely data that is stored in the physical brain, but our true memories, like our conscious memories, are attached to our soul, right? So you would still remember you and all of your experiences. The part of the brain that would give you feedback would be, I mean, we're kind of on camera here, like one of us might be taller than the other, one of us might
Mm.
weigh more than the other, so there's adjustments that need to be made, right? And so you would be able to get that information from the brain really quickly, so that you didn't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out the limb movements. It does still take some time. It's awkward as fuck, but it's made easier by the fact that there is a lot of that data stored in the brain. It's what we call like muscle memory, right? And so we use the mechanical memory of the person, but in terms of like my experiential memory, you wouldn't know any of that stuff.
It almost sounds like a walk-in kind of experience. Is that what people experience when they experience some kind of walk-in? It's like a something that they've consented for another being or another entity or another consciousness to come into your body. Because what would happen if I tried to come into your body and you didn't get out of your body, right? Is
Then I would
there
push you back. I would take it back. And
no.
there is like a process that like you can push someone kind of out of their body. But the way that it works is your soul has like an anchor to the body. It kind of actually anchors itself to the DNA of your body. And so when most people astral project, they perceive what they call silver cord, which is like a cord more or less between your physical body and your astral body. That exists because of this anchor point that I'm talking about. And so the anchor point in my body is an actual like little part of my own soul that recognizes me, right? So if you bring your soul into this body, this part of my soul is keeping the body alive for you. But if I want it back, I'm going to be able to just push you out and come back, right? It's almost like a snapback effect. And so what's happening with people in a walk-in scenario is they're actually either so traumatized that they're willing to take the step back and let someone else drive the car, which is a very similar thing to what they showed in that Get Out movie. That's actually how they were using that, which also could be nefariously produced like it was in programs. But a typical walk-in is just that. And then there's body borrowing, where, like, let's say your body goes through some kind of trauma and your soul decides to peace out. Like, you're leaving, the body's going to die otherwise. I could then step in and take over that body. And so that little part of our soul that actually animated the body to begin with and attached itself to the DNA isn't really connected to the consciousness of our soul. It's almost like an add-on or a side effect of our incarnation. But that's about the only thing that, you know, could be captured or controlled or in any sort of way here, is that little anchor point, which once again doesn't hold any of your consciousness, like isn't truly you. It's just an anchor point. It's just something you've created to hold on. And so that's what's going on with walk-ins, is they've taken the step back and someone else has taken the front, similar to an altar, except for it's actually two different souls. The other one would be body swapping, where we actually just trade, right? And then what I call body borrowing would be, you know, some disembodied entity wanting the experience of having a body on this planet. You could kind of come to the planet, hang out, wait for an experience or an opportunity to take over a body in that way. Sometimes when people have traumatic brain injuries, right, they come back as a different person. And I think that in the majority of cases, that has nothing to do with damage to the actual brain. That has to do with that soul checked out and some other soul stepped in and took over. I actually did an interview on my Patreon channel with a woman who claims to like be living that experience, where she came from some collective and took over the body of this woman who had been through this accident, and she now lives in that body and teaches through that body and experiences through that body. And so that's the dynamic that would happen.
But so the soul and the consciousness just takes a step back, right? It doesn't does it completely go, so that the other consciousness has enough room to be inside there? So is there two people, two consciousnesses inside of a body?
Can go both ways. Yeah, that's why I walked through like the three different versions of it. The walk-in, as we call it, that's that version of it, or a possession, if you will. It's essentially a possession.
Same thing.
And then the other one, like the body borrowing, I guess, would be where that actual soul ends up leaving, and so you're just left with their body, more or less.
Wow, that's interesting. Oh, I've talked about consciousness transfer and stuff like that before, but I didn't really know that. I thought maybe some kind of I had to have some kind of technology involved in to do it. But I mean, we're very powerful. We're supercomputers. We can basically do whatever we want.
Learned what I could do, and they've mimicked it by technology. Like now they actually have technology that can just push you out and move you into this body, right? And they learned that through basically observing people like me doing it in the natural way, and then duplicating that or mimicking that with technology.
So since we're kind of on this topic, what's the deal with reincarnation? Do we choose to come back here? Are we forced to come back here? Like, what's going on? This is a huge topic that a lot of people have talked about, and I've always been really interested in. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. What happens? Because there's been a lot of people say that we don't have a choice, that we automatically come back, and then there's other people that say that we do have a choice, and then some say that there's like a false light trap that will get us whenever we die, and then it automatically brings us right back into this reality. So what's going on there?
It's a big universe with a lot of variables, so a little bit of all of that. What people talk about with the soul trap technology was that Draco-reptilian technology that they used here. Now, the thing is, the physical universe views the buyer and seller of lies as equal. And so you can convince yourself that your soul is trapped, right? You can believe that. You can be convinced of that. You can buy that lie and live that result of a soul trap technology. But if you don't buy that lie, that trap can't hold you because nothing can actually truly hold a soul. So the soul trap was basically a mimic of the natural incarnation process that tricked a bunch of people into basically what ended up being a forced reincarnation, where they actually do erase the memory of the previous incarnation, don't allow you to make a set of choices on your next one, and just kind of force reincarnate you. But that's not everyone, first of all, and that's not the natural process. Every planet has its wheel of incarnation. It's like a dimension that souls go to when they leave these bodies. From that dimension, from that wheel of incarnation, they decide whether they want to reincarnate here and all the dynamics involved, all the situations involved with that, or if they want to depart and go to another realm, right? It's like another planet, if you will, and incarnate there. And part of the reason why, the actual reality of what's going on between planets and the secret space program don't work is each planet is kind of its own holographic realm. And each of those holographic realms or each of those planets operate in a certain spectrum of frequencies. So if you want to come into that hologram, you have to be calibrated with that set of frequencies. So going back to the whole gray thing, it's a lot easier for them to create grays here that are within this frequency and then come into the realm and operate that than it is to actually bring their physical bodies into here, or any of their physical toys at all, like even their crafts, into here, because there's a recalibration process that has to go on. Kind of like the teleportation technology that they show you in Star Trek, how it like basically breaks you down into just data. It breaks you down into information, and then that information reassembles itself on the other end. That's how actual travel between planets would have to happen, because you have to calibrate to this particular hologram. And there are crafts that you could build to do that, but they don't come down from outer space like we would perceive it. They actually kind of materialize or portal into here. It's a much different process. And if you were to see it, it would just look very different than our perception of like a bunch of ships, UFOs coming down from the sky and stuff. I mean, that would be really fucking cool, but that's just not how it works. And so again, if we're going to incarnate somewhere else, our soul has to be calibrated to incarnate there. And so that's why each planet has its own wheel of incarnation.
Yeah, I heard someone talk one time that they said that they could go to any planet in the universe as long as they knew the frequency of the planet. And that kind of correlates to what you're saying. It makes a
Same
lot of sense.
like even when we're astral projecting to other planets, because it's in the astral dimension, we don't need that calibration. But if we wanted to move our physical body there, then we would need that calibration.
Wow, that's intense. So the if the secret space program and a lot of these super soldiers are in some sort of holographic, projected reality, what makes it any different than the reality that we're currently in right now, me and you? Like, I tend to think that we're in a holographic projected reality as we speak, right?
What we call the organic reality is still holographic in nature, and it's all controlled by souls or consciousness. And the planet itself is a soul, right? And so that's why the framework of Earth is uniform, and we have a collective consciousness within the planet. And that uniformity, or that calibration, or that frequency, if you will, is what makes the uniformity here, or creates her hologram. So that's also the reason why holographic projection into a mind feels real, right? Is because it's our senses are not, again, calibrated to determine the difference, right? So that's why it actually works on a more scientific level, because it is nature in a way, or a mimic of nature, and how we actually perceive things anyways. There's a bunch of data floating around, if you will, or a bunch of information, a bunch of frequencies technically. And through this computer here, we assimilate that down into physical reality.
Then we can't distinguish what actually happened or what was real or what was an actual simulation because we can't wrap our brain around it. The processing power of our brain isn't enough to be able to distinguish the difference between a holographic simulated reality or this holographic simulated reality.
Yeah, like in terms like going back to the secret space program again, I mean, I went through a program that was a simulation that was very much like the aforementioned Ender's Game, right? Where it was like this idea that we were out in space and we were controlling all these ships and all this like war was going on and all of that. But I knew what I was going into, right? Like it was like explain to me beforehand, we're going to put you in this simulation. You're going to have these experiences. It's going to seem real, right? So cool. I go into it. I come out of it. I'm very consciously aware of the fact that it wasn't real. But everything I felt, right? It's attached to my memory as if it was. Right? Like I can't, it doesn't seem like it wasn't real to me. I just know that it wasn't, right? And so that's why I have that compassion or understanding, empathy for the people who think that it was, because I know that if they didn't have my vantage point of being consciously inserted into the simulation, they would have no mechanism to determine whether it was real or not, because it's recording on all of exactly the same perceptions that this hologram is doing it on, right? So again, like they just mimic nature and present it to us as technology.
What was the purpose of them doing that? Like
That's
to put all these people through this this holographic simulation. And then it becomes like, how do certain people know other people, or are they just making it up, right? Because there's people that'll be like, oh yeah, I know what's his name from this program that I was in, and then I remember this person. Are they making that up, or were they all in this simulation together?
Dude, if I had a quarter from every email I've gotten that I've been in someone's dreams, I'd be a very rich man. So I think that like, we don't really understand how our memory works all that well. And that's a problem. And because of that, we don't also understand how we symbolize things or make symbology out of information. So, I mean, my face could duplicate multiple avatars in your dream space, right? Like it could be overlaid on top, but that's not me in your dreams, right? So it's the same thing as like you're on Facebook, you're on this Facebook page that's centered on this secret space program, maybe just one whistleblower or whatever. You've got all these other people and you see their pictures, right? And everyone's interacting, everyone's on the same page, you're all talking the same nonsense, and then you go to sleep that night and you have a dream and you're dreaming about that nonsense, and of course that person's whose profile picture you saw is then that person, and of course, oh, I know him from the programs, right? So yeah, like I said, if I had a quarter from every time someone has told me that I've showed up in their dream over the last 10 years, I'd be a very rich man, and I know for sure I have not been in any of their dreams. Intentionally, right? Like they don't actually know me. We weren't actually involved in anything. So yeah, it's again a want to believe thing feeds all of this hysteria.
Yeah, I was consciously aware that stuff like that was, happening to me, because in the beginning, back in like 2015, I was really into it. I was like, okay, yeah, this stuff's crazy, it's wild, it's intriguing, and I would listen to something before bed, and then like I would dream about it. But I was always aware it was because I listened to it is the reason that I dreamed about it, right? It wasn't because it actually happened, it wasn't because I actually went through it. It was because it was affecting my subconscious mind. And whenever I was getting ready to go to sleep, it was just infiltrating in there. And then you just automatically dream about what you were listening to. And too many people have mistaken their dreams as being real, or that they're a part of something when they're really not. It's just your subconscious mind, playing tricks on you and duplicating what you're listening to.
That's it. It's like I was listening to whistleblowers being like, "Oh, I was taken out of my bed while I was sleeping, but my body was still in my bed." It was just, wait, what? Like, no. I was actually driven to places and taken to places while I was awake, while I was conscious, just like we're having this conversation now, right? It was not I wasn't dreaming any of it. And I wasn't going to sleep and waking up in places. I was physically traveling to these different buildings and these different establishments for these different reasons. So that's why my perception of it is probably different than most people. I can understand that if you didn't have that, then yeah, it would be very confusing. And because our memory, like every time we recall something and we put it away, we're rewriting it, right? So if we come up with any new details and we put that memory away, we're rewriting it. So if someone does have programmed memories bouncing around in their head, and then they hear a speaker talk about something that sounds similar, right? It's going to pull that memory forward. It's going to overwrite it with what that speaker said. And then when they put it away, it becomes their real memory again, right? But if they never heard that speaker, then that would never happen. When I wrote the blog, it was for about 13 people I knew personally who don't follow this stuff online. Like they actually think it's absurd that I am having this conversation or a conversation like this right now. And so when they started reading what the people were saying online, they started to make sense of this. Like, man, this could really ruin us. Like if we had to just dove into that, like we'd be screwed right now. So of course, a lot of these people who are even more unconscious than them are completely crazy with it. It makes sense. And that's why I'm like, as much as I'm telling people that they're wrong or that they're like basically believing a false reality, I'm not an asshole about that because I actually legitimately feel bad that you can't tell the difference. Like I hate that you can't tell the difference because you can't tell the difference. That makes a lot of sense, but that's not helping you live life at all.
Mm.
Whereas understanding what it was would very much help you live life because you'd be looking at everything going on in the world right now and it would be making perfect sense to you. And instead of being upset about it and, isolating yourself and all the other things that a lot of people in this community have been doing over the last 2 years, you'd be pretty well adjusted and kind of enjoying the ride in a certain sense, right? Because you'd have a true understanding of it. I feel bad that you don't, right? And it must be really hard. So I do have compassion. And I'm sorry for anyone who's like taking offense to me saying you were never really in outer space. You didn't really fight any mantids. You weren't really on Mars fighting people like fighting Greys. You weren't really battling raptors on Jupiter. You weren't really doing any of that stuff. None of that stuff is even possible. But you are fully convinced that you were because of all of this other stuff that is clearly possible. And if you don't believe it's possible now, you will within the next couple of years because this stuff is rolling out rapidly. Just listen to Mark Zuckerberg on the latest Joe Rogan podcast that he did with him, and he spells it all out for you. Listen to any one of Lex Friedman's guests. They spell it all out for you. All of the stuff I've been talking about for the last 10 years is right here, right now, in reality for everyone to see, no longer deniable, no longer up for debate. But if you want to keep talking about like, fighting people in the Galactic Federation of Light, you go right ahead.
You're so on point, brother. I love it. Where can people find you online? Are you still doing your blog? You still have a YouTube channel? Because you had a YouTube channel here a couple of years ago. Are you still doing anything on it?
The YouTube channel's still there. I moved everything behind Patreon now. So I have a
Okay.
Patreon page that I do things. And that's because I prefer to not have to deal with all of that clutter, right? Like if you're not on that same page where you actually do want to get to the truth of this and you're not just absorbed in the sexy story, I don't really need to be talking to you at this point in time, right? So if you're going to come looking for those sexy stories and all of that entertainment side of things, I don't have that for you. So keeping it behind the paywall limits my audience in that sense, right? And makes sure that I know and they know we're here for a reason, and that's to actually make some sense out of this stuff and not just, do a circle jerk of storytelling like a lot of it tends to be.
So where can you send me the Patreon link so I can put it in the description of this video so people can check it out?
I will, yeah. And like if you do the link tree URL / Shane_Sedore, you'll find all my links. I do have a public podcast I do called Miscellanea, which is not quite conspiracy. It's more just people telling their own personal stories and a variety of different lights of the world. And then the Patreon stuff. I'm writing an online story that's also on Patreon. And I also have a website called The Rebels Advocate through which I offer one-on-one sessions. um, what I call metaphysical support, which is kind of like talk therapy with the twist of I understand the metaphysical aspect of this, not just the psychology aspect of this. And then also taking all of that, what I've learned, basically the answer to the how and why I survived what I did. And I'm still a fairly well adjusted person. And I call it a magic class. So that's, if anyone's interested in that, it's the website you can find through just whatever the beginning of the link tree URL is. It's uniform slash with capital S's Shane_Sedore, and you'll find all my links there.
Thanks so much, Shane. I appreciate you coming on. I very much appreciate you, and I appreciate the conversation. I had a lot of fun here tonight. Would love to have you back on sometime in the future, my friend.
For sure, man. Anytime. Nice meeting you as well. It's nice to see, people legitimately looking and legitimately trying to share this information and get to the bottom of it without just wanting to be super soldier special people and better than everyone else, right? Because that's where it all ends up.
It does, and when you look at things with critical thinking and common sense, you realize that it's exactly like what you were talking about. None of it's actually physically possible in this 3D reality, right? It either has to be happening somewhere else, it either has to be in a parallel reality, alternate dimension, or some kind of different, completely different reality, or it didn't happen at all, or it's a simulation, a holographic simulation, like you're talking about. And I think that, to me, I think both of them make complete sense, that it could be in a completely opposite reality, or it could be like a straight up holographic simulation, and they're giving people drugs, and they're putting a screen in front of their face, and they believe that they're going through this entire life. And it's exactly like what you're talking about it with the drugs. There's been people that's taken mescaline and lived 20 freaking years of their life, and then they come back and they're like, what was that? You know what I mean? Like,
people can induce experiences like that through breathing techniques, right? Like I've actually done it to myself accidentally, where I had like what seemed like a 6-week period of like another wife, a couple kids I don't know, in a town I've never been to, and a job that I'd have to go to every day. And I was in a bath at the time, and what seemed like 6 weeks of a lifetime was really about the time it took for one song to play, because I remember the song that was playing when I entered that state, and when I came out of that state, the same song was playing. Average, I think it was a Tool song, so that could have been up to 10 minutes, but the point being that it was not 6 weeks. And my own lungs did that by secreting DMT, right? So if we are that powerful, just imagine how powerful that experience can be with someone directing it.
yeah, people don't know that breathing exercises activates natural DMT and natural benzodiazepine in your brain that can relax you. It can. I haven't gotten that far with it, but I've came very close to getting outside of my body whenever I was doing a breathing exercise really late at night. Like I saw this like portal thing open up in my mind's eye. Like I had my eyes closed. It was like 4 a.m. And then I had like one leg outside of the portal, like getting ready to go to the other side. And then my roommate at the time opened the door and it knocked me out of the state. But it was really, really cool. It was like I was in that vibrative state. Like whenever people are getting ready to astral travel, they always feel like their entire body is vibrating. Started at my feet, and then it worked up all my legs, and then I got to the top of my head, and then that's when I saw the portal open, and I was getting ready to go through, and I was so excited. I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get through it," and then I just snapped right out of it. I haven't gotten back to that state since, but I really haven't been trying. I need to really get back into it. I normally do it to kind of go to sleep at night and to relax my body and do some different breathing exercises. Breathing through your nose, hold it. So when you press it, you press your stomach, and then it kind of like you're trying to sit on the toilet taking a shit, and then you just press your stomach, and then you kind of pump it a little bit, and you do that like 5 or 6 times, and it knocks you out basically.
It's also good training for breath control for singing. It's all the same practices, actually.
Yeah, from your diaphragm. Yeah, from your gut.
What they call rotunda breathing. Yeah.
Mm. Well, thank you so much again, Shane. And all the links to Shane's information will be in the description of this video. I highly recommend people check it out. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. When it premieres, thumbs up to help the channel out in YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there, hit the follow button for my premium content, and you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and download them individually to your device for free on Spreaker.com. Remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep love in your heart for everyone, stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.